Let's now check out the controls for Granulator 3. Now the Granulator 3 pack comes with a bunch of content. Specifically, we have samples in here. Let's check out some of these samples, maybe in the vocals category. Alright, so let's say I would like to use one of these samples in the Granulator engine. I can just click and drag and drop it into the drop sample here. And you can see now the sample is loaded in. The interface looks a lot more like an Ableton Live device compared to Granulator 2. We have three granulation modes. There's Classic, Loop, and Cloud. In Classic mode, we're closer to how things used to be in Granulator 2. Currently, we're playing this segment over here. I can reposition that to the beginning where we have some audio content. Cool. In loop mode, we get some reverse playback options. So when I select the grain size, you can see there's a reverse percentage here. And by the way, this little bar over here will update depending on which control you've selected. You can see here there's a little arrow. So we're looking at the grain size controls. So there's a reverse percentage. If I increase that. So it's not a switch, it's a percentage, kind of like a probability of when a reverse playback will occur. If I switch back to classical mode, you'll notice that that reverse option is grayed out. So that's one main difference between classic and loop. And then there's this grain cloud option mode where you get to choose the number of grains, lowest being 2. And maximum being 20. And of course, we can adjust the grain size in all three modes. Position. I'm back in classic mode because I want to show you this distance, percentage, and loop option. So currently, my grain size is under 100 milliseconds. Position is over here, which by the way, you can adjust directly on the waveform. Now we're stuck in this segment over here because scan is set to 0. If I increase scan, this red playback bar appears, and now when I play a note, you notice how we're no longer stuck within that tiny grain segment. We go through to the rest of the audio sample. Now let's check out what happens when I reduce this distance percentage. The red bar moves. It's kind of like I'm defining an endpoint. So we start from here, and then we loop a segment over here. I like that this can be adjusted in real time. And then there's this loop button that we can activate. And now we're kind of setting the start and end point for it to loop within that entire range. So when loop is off, it just goes through the playback once and then just loops the end point. With loop on, it loops the entire segment. I want to talk about this shape parameter. So think of this as windowing or adding a crossfade on individual grains. I'm going to go back to classic mode. I've set the scan back to 0, distance is at 100%, and loop is off. So we're just looping this segment over here. And with the shape at 50%, approximately 50%, we get a triangular windowing. So basically there's a fade in and a fade out. If I bring the shape closer to 0, that triangular windowing leans more towards a sawtooth ramp down effect. So we basically have no attack and a bit of a decay. So you get that pluck-like effect. Sorry, didn't mean to adjust the variation. We're talking about shape here. So back in the center, we get this nice crossfading with the triangular shape. Now if I move this to the positive, closer to 100, we're kind of getting a reverse effect because the windowing shape is now kind of like a sawtooth ramp up shape. So we're starting at the bottom here, going up, and then abruptly ending the signal. Pretty cool that we can do that. I want to now talk about this variation knob because it can introduce some randomization in some of these controls, but yet it's very, very controllable. So what can the variation vary? So it can vary the grain position, the grain size, the transposition or pitch of the individual grains, though this only works in cloud mode as we'll see in a second, but also the volume of each grain. Alright, so I'm going to start in classic mode. I've swapped out the sample here using a different sample from the same pack. Let's reposition this. Now while the position knob is selected, as you can see, it's in focus over here. And if we go all the way to the right, the variation is set to 1 second. Let me set this to 0. Select grain size. You can see variation there is set to 0 already. Now I'm going to increase the variation knob. Notice at 100%, pretty much nothing is changing. Let's go into position. Oh, it was set to 0.12, so there's a very subtle change. But now there's absolutely no change. Let's increase this. So you can see the change being introduced there. So about 500 milliseconds of audio, it can capture more. I wish there was a negative value for this so you could also search or select snippets from before the playhead here, or before that position. Alright, so that's a variation in terms of position. Let's check out variation in terms of size. So size is exactly the same right now. I'm going to add some variation. And now the size is changing. Let's do both, position as well. Introduce some scanning. A bit harder to hear this when the scan is active, but I'm going to bring it down and let's talk about transposition. So, like I said, we can introduce variation in transposition, but in classic mode it's grayed out. In loop mode it's grayed out. But in cloud mode it's available because we have the possibility of changing the density. So let's say I'll increase this to 7. So when I play one note, we're hearing 7 layers. Let's get rid of variation on everything else here. And now let's introduce some variation in transposition. This is in semitone, so it can be pretty drastic. You may want to adjust this in a very fine-tuned way. I have a feeling this is broken right now because when I set it to negative values, the pitch doesn't change. But positive values seems to be working fine. Lastly, let's talk about variation in terms of volume. So this is available in the cloud version, the loop version, and also in classic mode. Alright, so we're back to this very tiny grain. Make it a bit longer. Let's introduce some volume variation. Pretty cool. Alright, so I have swapped out the sample again and reset all the controls. So this is what we have right now. Now, I haven't been talking about these two tabs here because we're in auto mode. So there are two tabs in Granulator. We have this waveform view tab and we also have this control view where we have the modulation, which we're going to talk about right now. But in auto mode, it automatically switches between the two depending on what you are controlling. So if I adjust any controls within the Granulator engine, we are staying in the waveform view. But as soon as I start selecting these knobs, we switch to that other view. So that's auto switching between the two views. I guess variation is the one knob that doesn't auto switch. All right, so let's now take a look at some of the modulation options we have. So let's say I would like this transposition to change based on one of these envelopes. So envelope 1 is pre-assigned to volume. So I can shape my volume with this ADSR. But I have envelope 2 that can be assigned to different parameters. You can see here in this middle section, envelope 2 is set to 0%. If I increase that, so now this shape is going to adjust the transposition. We're hearing a little bit of a click because I've reduced the attack to the lowest value. Let's increase it just a wee bit. Smoothen that out a bit. Now we can also use the LFO instead. Let's try the LFO on something else. There's a spread control here. So you should notice this on headphones. There's really interesting stereo spread that's happening, while at the same time the pitch is being transposed. So you should hear in this position on the left speaker, the pitch is down an octave, whereas on the right speaker, the pitch is up an octave. So let's say I'd like to modulate this with an LFO. So I'll increase this LFO amount here. Let's take a look at the LFO controls. So there's an LFO frequency, LFO amount, and here we have further controls for the LFO. It can be in free running in terms of the frequency, setting it in hertz, or it can be set to musical subdivisions. So this works in 16th notes. So when it's set to 1, it is 1/16th note. All right, so I wanted to apply this to spread. Now we're not hearing anything yet because spread needs to be up. Now you hear it. Let's try a different shape. Can sound pretty dramatic at these high values, but just maybe a little bit of it could work a bit better. All right, so that's spread. Let's talk about the filter over here. We have a standard filter which can be changed from low pass to a bunch of these other filter types. It is a resonant filter, so you can increase the resonance here and adjust the filter frequency over here, which is a bit odd that this control is over here, whereas this is all the way over here. Let's take a look at what we can use to modulate this. Keyboard tracking, velocity, note, pitch bend, slide, pressure. So this is MPE capable, so you can use your MPE controller to modulate the sounds that you're creating in Granulator 3. Let's work with the LFO for now. Interesting how you can use envelope 2 to modulate the filter cutoff, but also envelope 1. So all these three can be active on the filter frequency. The LFO rate can be modulated with the envelope as well. We've already seen transposition. We can only use envelope 2 or LFO to modulate it. There is a random option here to introduce randomization if required. And even the volume can be affected by the LFO. There's this interesting hold feature. So if I turn on hold and let go of the notes I was holding, those notes permanently stay on, and then when I turn off the hold button, those notes disappear. The synth can be in polyphonic as well as in monophonic mode, and we can add glide in monophonic mode. Now, just like Granulator 2, Granulator 3 supports live audio capture, but it's much more intuitive in Granulator 3. So in this waveform view, I don't have a sample right now, but I can click on I/O and switch to this capture mode. Now we do need to set a source. So it can be an external input, let's say, as you can see here, microphone signal coming in, or anything plugged into your audio interface. I'm actually going to select another audio track. It is still my voice, but I'll make sure that it's going post effects, not post mixer, because I brought the volume down on that track, because I just want to monitor it when it goes through Granulator 3. All right, so we can adjust the buffer size that it's going to capture. So I'd say 2 seconds is good enough. It's really interesting how the capture happens. So let's explore this. I'm playing notes on my keyboard right now, and obviously you're not hearing anything. But as soon as I hit capture, it got the audio of me speaking. In fact, let's adjust the green size, actually the position here, and let's engage scan. Play an octave higher. Anything. But as soon as I hit capture, that's interesting. So it seems like it captures the audio before I hit the capture button. So technically this buffer is constantly being populated, and as soon as you hit capture, we hear what was captured up to that point of clicking the capture button. Pretty interesting.
That point of clicking the capture.
All right, so let's try this again while the notes are playing. A bit messy. Go back to classic mode. I'm gonna hit that button one more time here. So there you go, a very simple way to capture live audio into Granulator 3. So those were some of the new features in Ableton Live 12's all-new Granulator 3 synthesizer. Stay tuned to learn more about Ableton Live 12's new features.